We'll stay on the story a while longer, but this time from the court because the Supreme Court has struck out a request to restrain Johnson Asiedu from acting as Auditor General. This was after the court had granted Deputy Attorney General Godfred Ackah-Blay's request to have Mr. Asiedu and the Auditor General Daniel Domilevo struck out as defendants in the case. Now, this is a case filed by CDD Fellow in Public Law and Justice, Professor Stephen Asari, challenging the presidential directive that Mr. Domilevo proceeds on leave. Court correspondent Joseph Ackah-Blay joins me on the line with more on this. Joseph, tell us about the oral argument in support of the action and against the injunction by Godfred Dame.
And so Godfred Dame had made a point that the documents that have been filed, he says the Auditor General has not undertaken any action which Professor Asari is challenging. He again makes the point that the acting Auditor General has also not undertaken an action which is the subject of the litigation. He says they are simply in court because they are unhappy about the president asking Mr. Domilevo to proceed on leave and also asking Mr. Asiedu to act in his behalf. And so the action that they are challenging is actually the directive from the president. And so he sees no basis as to why the two should be joined as defendants. Lawyers for Professor Asari responded that one is a victim of the action and the other is a beneficiary of the action, so they must be joined. But the court took a different view and afterwards struck out the two as defendants in this particular matter. And so once the court dealt with the bit relating to who should be a defendant in the case, we were just left with the Attorney General as defendants. Now, the motion for injunction was asking the court to restrain Mr. Domilevo from proceeding on leave and also to restrain Mr. Asiedu from acting as the acting Auditor General. And so the court then made a point that once they struck out the two as defendants, how then can it restrain two people who are not defendants in the case from performing their own functions? And so on that basis, the court again dismissed that particular request for the injunction as well.
So the substantive case is still there, which is the challenge as to whether or not the president has the power to instruct the Auditor General to proceed on leave. But there's another case in which the Auditor General is involved, and we know that the AG says he is supposed to represent that office and the Auditor General, but Daniel Domilevo came into court with his own lawyer. Tell us about that case and what's happened.
So that case has to do with a matter that was brought by a private legal practitioner, Isaac Wilberforce. That has to do with some disagreement that are taking place between the Audit Service Board and the Auditor General about transfer of the staff of the Auditor General's office. And so he brought the matter to court, asking the court that it should determine the line of authority within the Audit Service, whether the Auditor General has the power to be transferring staff in such a manner or whether he doesn't have the power to do so. And so that was the case. When the case was called, private legal practitioner Ackah-Blay introduced himself as a lawyer for the Auditor General. Chief State Attorney Sylvester Williams, when he was announced himself as being a lawyer for the Auditor General as well as for the Attorney General's office. And so it was at that point that the judges expressed the concern that, they don't understand why one case you have two separate lawyers representing one defendant and also filing two separate statements of case, each with contradictory positions. And so the court made a point that it's important that they resolve this particular matter. At that point, Deputy Attorney General Godfred Dame, who was seated in the courtroom, stood up and made the point to the court that he holds the view that the Attorney General is the proper defendant in this particular case and that the Audit Service and the Auditor General should not have even been joined as defendants in this particular matter too. But the court said that once those issues are not before it currently, he expects that they go through the process and resolve the dispute to determine who represents the Auditor General, whether it should be the Attorney General's office or it should be the Auditor General having his own lawyers in this particular matter.
Thank you very much, Joseph Ackah-Blay, for bringing us details from the court.